Welcome to Insight, a series exploring the deeper philosophies of renowned traditional martial artists, hosted by Ray Hughes, a martial artist with 50 years of experience.
Hey, welcome to the show. Today's guest is Sensei Gary Tsutsui. He's a well-known martial artist, started his training back in the mid-60s. He was the first American to medal in individual kata at the 1977 WUKO Championships, today's WIKF. He was a four-time USA Karate member. He was inducted into the United States Karate-Do Federation Traditional Karate Hall of Fame in 2001. He has had national, PKF, and WKF certification. He was also the former chairman of the Referee Council for USA Karate and has served as the regional vice president. With that, today's guest, Sensei Gary Tsutsui. Hey, welcome to the show. Today's guest is Sensei Gary Tsutsui. Sensei, how are you today?
Great. How about you?
Oh, it's very great, and it's an honor to have you on my show. Before I ask you the question about how, when, where, and why you started martial arts, I want to let the audience know a little bit about how I first heard about you and your accomplishments. I was training in the mid to late 70s as a color belt. Our school wasn't part of USNKF or AAU. We were competing, mostly local and regional, and I just remember all of a sudden getting the news that an American had medaled at the World Championships in kata. And you know what? It was a really cool thing. You had a lot of great vibes. It's kind of like one of the people in the United States winning a gold medal, in the Olympics. It was that kind of a feeling. And I just wanted to pass that on. So that was the first time I heard about you and your great accomplishments back in I think it was like 1977.
You're so kind.
So, Sensei, tell me why, how, where, and when did you start training?
My first exposure to karate was actually when I was in third or fourth grade. I was kind of mentored by this third grade school teacher that was aware that I was growing up in a single parent family household, and we weren't really well off and stuff like that. So we didn't have a lot of transportation or ability to access the public library and those kinds of things. So this particular teacher took me under her wing, took me to the public library. I got a library card for access to the Denver Public Library. And that was such a gift because I would spend so many hours on my own. I'd bike there or go on the bus from that point on, and then just live within the shelves of that library. And then I stumbled onto Mas Oyama's karate book. And Mas Oyama, for those of you that don't know, of course, was the originator of Kyokushinkai. And that book was the first exposure to karate that I had no knowledge of, no prior knowledge of. And it was non-existent here in the Denver area. It wasn't until I grew up and was in high school that I started seeing and hearing things about karate, and of course with Bruce Lee and all the influence that he had on the film industry and stuff like that. Then I started thinking about it a little bit more, but again, there was nothing here in Denver other than there were some Taekwondo styles and some Kung Fu styles, but because I grew up in the Japanese community, I had very little access to those resources. The Denver Buddhist Temple in downtown Denver was a hub of cultural activity as well as the center of the Japanese community. They used to have an annual talent show. And this one talent show in 1965, winter of 65, I believe it was, they had Yaguchi sensei from Japan, who had been here at that time about 6 or 7 months, I believe. And he was scheduled to give a demonstration. And I didn't know about the demonstration. I just happened to be at the show. But during the introduction for Yaguchi sensei, I could hear this kind of rumbling. It was like somebody tapping on the microphone and blowing into the microphone. And I later found out after the demonstration, it was Yaguchi sensei that was warming up on side of the stage, and the vibration from his body was going through the stage, the surface of the stage, and it was being picked up by the microphone, which was the center stage. And then I was just awestruck. A couple reasons. Number one, I'd never seen anybody that was Japanese with such athletic ability. I didn't have any kind of heroes at that time. And even in baseball, there wasn't a real presence like there is right now with the current baseball players from Japan. Right. And then just on a local level, Tommy Kono, who was Olympic bodybuilder and weightlifter from Hawaii. But Hawaii was like a different country at that time, even though it was a state. So I knew about Tommy Kono, but other professional athletes, little to no knowledge at all. So when I saw Yaguchi demonstrate his roundhouse kick, which I think you've probably heard about, it's kind of roundhouse kick that starts at the top and then goes down. I said, wow, I got to do that. So I was 18, the spring, I saw that. I think I started shortly after that. So that was in 1965. That I started karate under Yaguchi Sensei. And I was just really fortuitous that my family lived directly across the street from the Denver Buddhist Temple. And there was a building there. I lived in a hotel, which my grandmother leased and ran the business. And it was a 3-story building. But on street level, there was a vacant space on one side of the stairway leading up to the hotel. And that's where Denver School of Judo, who at the time was a powerhouse nationally. They had a lot of international competitors and a lot of medalists internationally. They had a school there that was operational, and I used to watch their lessons, standing on the window looking in. But as I said, we didn't have a lot of resources, so my mother wasn't able to pay for judo lessons, so I just watched, and it was just meant to be, I guess. That judo school, Denver School of Judo, vacated that space. They were doing very well at the time, and then they bought a lot a couple blocks away from the central business district in Denver, which was the Japanese community, and then they built a brand new dojo, and it was a multi-level structure. And as I said, they were a powerhouse nationally. But when they made that move, Yaguchi Sensei and Iwakabe Sensei, Hideki Iwakabe, and Joseph Castillo, a Denver police officer, took over that space. And since it was just downstairs from where I was living, I kind of started there. So that's how I started in karate. It was the very first Japanese style, traditional style dojo here in Denver. Soon to follow that was Kurobana Sensei. And he actually started, I met him just about a year or two later, and he had started a program at the Denver Buddhist Temple in the basement. And from there, of course, he went to a private location in the suburbs in Denver. So that's how I got started, and I met 2 different native Japanese instructors, and that was the start of traditional karate here in Denver.
Well, so you start training with Yaguchi Sensei. Were you shocked with the harshness of the training, or were you mentally prepared for that? All I know is when I started, I was going to quit every single day because it was so hard.
I loved it so much, I signed up for 2-a-days. And I'll be honest with you, after the first lesson, I said, I don't know, I think I made a mistake. And I think for the first 3 weeks, I was going to quit after every midday session, and then I had the night session. I was going to quit every night that I trained for 3 weeks as well. For whatever, I don't know if I need to thank the gods or whatever for not allowing me to quit, but I'm so happy I didn't quit. That dojo, the beginning dojo, that class that I was in, I think there were about 60 or 65 people in that class. And then when we do basic sparring, 3-point sparring, basic sparring, it's 3 face attacks, block counters, and 3 stomach attack block counters. Everybody had black and blue forearms from the wrist all the way down to the elbow, including the women. It was tough training. And then the line drills, there'd be 60 of us from front to end, inside the dojo, out near the street, close to the street area. And then I can remember Yaguchi Sensei as well was a native Japanese trained as well. And this police officer, Denver police officer Joseph Castillo, he also went to the instructor school in Japan. So all 3 of them came from that same tradition. I never viewed it as excessive nor unnecessary contact. But I can remember you do a reverse punch and your arm's out there and they come by and they just whack that arm. And that's just how it used to be. So I think growing up in a Japanese family, I don't want to say that physical abuse is part of the daily family dynamic, but there is a certain level of expectation with regard to, well, if you say something or you do something that is not acceptable, you're going to get a pretty good whack on the head or on the butt, So I can remember being at the dinner table many times with the entire family, my parent, my mother, my grandparents. And then I knew that even at the dinner table, if I said something that was unacceptable, my grandfather would reach across and whack you on the head.
So now, how long were you at Yaguchi school?
Unfortunately, I didn't really get to train with Sensei every day for the 6 year period that I remained in Colorado while I trained. Yaguchi Sensei was soon, I think after a year, 9 months to a year, I can't remember what it was, he was called to Los Angeles to fill in for Nishiyama Sensei, who had been called back to Japan. So Yaguchi Sensei spent a good chunk of time out in California. I was here in Denver. I continued training with Joseph Castillo. The 6 year period that I first started karate and I ended up moving to California, the first year, 9 months to a year, was with Yaguchi Sensei, and then a continuation with Joseph Castillo. Then when I moved out to California, Yaguchi Sensei came back to Denver, so we just kind of crossed paths. And I maintained I would like to think, of close relationship with him, because every time I came back to Denver, and it was every summer, I would train with him while I was here in Denver, and that was for 2 to 3 weeks every summer. So that's how I continued the training. On the my resume and my background information, I do list him as the primary person that I first started with. But I don't want to make light of the fact that I did continue to train with Joseph Castillo for 6 months, and Iwakabe Sensei was involved in that for a short time, but it's primarily Joseph Castillo in the early years after Yaguchi Sensei, and then from the early years until he passed away a couple years, 2-3 years ago, it was with Yaguchi Sensei at every opportunity whenever I was here back in Denver. It was actually Yaguchi Sensei that urged me to start teaching. One of the summers, I can remember very distinctly the day after training, he just said, "When are you going to start teaching?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, Sensei. I don't know if I'm ready or not." And he said, "You're ready. Time to teach." So that I started teaching.
Was that when you were in California or in Colorado?
That's when I was in California, yeah. I was only at green belt level, okay? So the school here in Denver was very, very traditional, and very little sparring, very little free sparring, a lot of one-point sparring, and a lot of free one-point sparring. So when I went to California and started working out with Yamazaki Sensei out there, I felt like I was just so far behind with regard to my personal growth, because when I went out to California, I think I only knew 1 or 2 advanced kata. I go out to California and all these brown belts and green belts are doing all these advanced katas, so I had to really catch up. But the training that I received here in Denver was so good that it didn't present that much of a difficulty for me. So I ended up getting my black belt in California after I was there a year or 2 years, I can't remember what it was, under Yamazaki Sensei. And that was simultaneous with the time, one of the summers when I came back, that Yaguchi said that I should start teaching. And it was also just coincidental that the Irvine location that Yamazaki Sensei was teaching at, he did not want to continue teaching there, so I took over that program at University of California, Irvine, and then also continued training with Yamazaki Sensei on a daily basis from that point on. So that would have been 1970 to 2008. I was affiliated with Yamazaki Sensei.
How was that training? Was that harsh? Was it enjoyable? How was that?
I don't know. Everything is relative, so.
Absolutely.
Did I want to quit sometimes? Absolutely. Absolutely. When I was training with, I was really lucky. Yamazaki Sensei was a very unusual native Japanese instructor. One thing was his English was a little bit better than a lot of these native Japanese instructors. Chuck Coburn, who is living in your city down in Phoenix, I can remember him saying to me that he really loved training with Koyama Sensei, but God, I just wish he would learn a few more words of English, So I said, well, yeah, Yamazaki Sensei's a little bit better, but you got to really listen carefully. And I'm lucky that I understand Japanese, so if he said something that people didn't understand, they'd kind of look at me and I think, well, let me think about this a little bit first,
Yeah, it's so funny you said that, because Osaka up over in Utah was the same way, and I remember being in a class with Osaka, and he would explain something, nobody would do anything, and then he would turn to Rick Hobush, and Rick Hobush would translate for him what he was trying to say. So I definitely get that.
Well, during that time, and this is really during the 70s, I lived out in California for 10 years, from 1970 to 1980. Let's see, 1980, is that right? 77, 87, 87, yeah, just prior to the 90s. On the times that I would come back and train with Yaguchi Sensei, it was just so funny because there'd be a line of us, and he would be at the end of the line, no matter what end, and then he'd shout out some instructions or whatever, and they didn't understand, and you could see these heads popping out and then looking both ways to see what we're doing,
Well, was that at that time, do you feel is where you developed your kata expertise, was in those years of training? Because you're a remarkable kata practitioner. But how did that develop?
Thank you for those kind words. I think definitely the fact that I was drilled so diligently and just every day. This Joseph Castillo, he was Hawaiian, and a true Hawaiian from Hawaii, that after the war, or after the occupation, after World War II, he trained in Japan, went through the instructor school, the whole thing. When he came back to the United States, he was only a Nidan. I think part of that is that he was non-Japanese, and given the way that he was and the strength that he demonstrated, I think probably that there were some things going on there where he was prevented from attaining a higher rank. I don't know for sure, but that's just my perception of it. But one of the jokes used to be with training with the Castillo Sensei, nobody would ever ask, what'd you do in class last night or whatever? Because for all the years, all the people that were dedicated karate people training there, we knew exactly what it was going to be. You had the seiza, right? You had warm-ups, and then you had kihon. And the kihon was the same, right? I don't know if there's any class that we didn't do step-in stomach punch, the very first technique, okay? I can't think of any class where that wasn't followed by just down block reverse punch. The class was set, and it was set. Rarely did he depart from that structure. So my foundation was it was just set in stone. I mean, it was just every time we trained, and I trained 6 days a week. Dojo was closed on Sundays. And it was the same every single class, and rarely something different. I guess I was lucky that I got that kind of training. Because when I went out to California, my basics were very, very strong. And even though I said I felt like I was kind of behind, I was kind of behind only in the sparring aspect, because there was much more participation and widespread tournament competition at that time in California. So everybody that I trained with at that point was, they were well-seasoned competitors in that tournament in sport karate. But my basics were easily much stronger than theirs. And I think that ability and that technical training I received for those 6 years prior to moving out to California, I was really fortunate with. And I think that's where the kata training really came through. And then I was really lucky in meeting Yamazaki Sensei, because, and I was beginning to say that he was really unusual as a native Japanese instructor, because he had a very open mind. And if I wanted to go to an open tournament and try something, or go train with somebody that was a different style or whatever, it was always, oh yeah, go ahead, learn something different, and always encouraging my interest in broadening my technical knowledge. So I was never held back in that respect and said that I couldn't practice this kata or that kata or whatever. And then he really helped me with regard to that. And then specifically with regard to the training for the World Championships, I didn't train for 4 years or 8 years like these Olympic athletes do. We got word that they were going to have World Championships. That was about a year out. So at the 9 or 10 month point, we decided, well, let's make that a goal. I'll try and make the U.S. team, and then I would compete, and we would compete in kata. And I think the major difference in the training that I received from current athletes right now is it wasn't just kata training. Sensei was a strong proponent of this is a fighting art. You got to fight too. So the training was spread out over kata and kumite training. I continued that training with Sensei, and he spent a lot of extra time training me. And that thing about quitting, I can remember one day at Irvine, after a class that I was teaching, I got someone to sub the class, and we had to go over some fine points in the kata. And it was just, I do the kata, and you look at it and you say, wow, you got to fix this. Then I do the kata again. You got to fix this. right around the hour and a half point, I was thinking, he's going to tell me I got to do it again. I'm going to tell him I can't do it. I'm going to quit. And that feeling of getting so close to quitting, and then taking a deep breath and saying, okay, one more time. That was tough.
During that time, were you already involved?
No. Let's see. I got involved with the USNKF 1994. I think 1994 was the first year of USNKF.
Oh, so were you part of an organization at that time, a sport organization to get to the World Championships?
When I competed in 1977, I was part of Japan Karate Do Ryobukai, which is Yamazaki Sensei's organization. Prior to that, I was involved with AAU. I had not done any officiating at that point, only as an athlete. So when I competed in 1977, I was training with Yamazaki Sensei in his organization, and I was affiliated with AAU. AAU at that point was the National Federation. These years are kind of all muddling together. In the early 80s, there was a mandate from the USOC that the national federations for all the sports had to be independent of other organizations of their sport. So that's why you get USA Gymnastics, even though they have a broader AAU organization, or USA Swimming, even though they have a broader swimming organization. The NGBs had to be freestanding organizations from the larger community, from AAU. So there was a tournament, and I'd have to look at my notes for the exact year, but there was a AAU used to have regional eliminations, and you had like Southwest, Northeast, Northwest, all that kind of stuff. And then for the mountain area, we went down to Tucson, Arizona, and they were having a qualifier there for AAU that year. And it was at that tournament that Julius Thierry called a group of us together, and I can remember late that night going up to his hotel room, and then we had a meeting, and the decision was made to split off from AAU and attempt to get designated the national governing body. When the AAU received the mandate for restructuring, at that point the doors were open for anyone that wanted to apply for designation as the national governing body. And so it was at that night that the decision was made by a number of people, including myself, to split off from AAU and then start applying for membership to the USOC to be designated the national governing body for traditional karate.
That formed at that time when you competed? Was that in place at that time?
After. It was after.
After, got it.
Because I competed in 77, and as I said, it's sometime during the 80s that transition took place. So the membership committee for the USOC saw before them the applicants for the National Federation. It was our group, headed by Julius Thierry. There was still the AAU group. That was headed by George Anderson. There was a women's organization from the Northwest. They also submitted a proposal. There were two other major national organizations that were vying for that designation as well. So at that point, we had a national championship for the new group that was trying to be designated in Seattle, Washington, and I believe that was in 2004. That was the first national championships. And then what proceeded to happen after that and continued to happen was there were membership committee meetings with the USOC in which we would present to them our proposal for all the reasons that we should be designated the national governing body, as well as presenting our bylaws and all that stuff, which they had all the attorneys peruse and look over. And then they would say, well, you need to have this corrected, this and whatever. And then we remember traveling to Los Angeles, Chicago, Florida, Washington, D.C., and I can't remember where that went on, a year or 2 years. And still, there was not a national governing body for karate in the United States. And then finally, we were designated the group that would get that designation. And that at that point, it was USA NKF.
Well, was that a good time period? Was it exciting, or was it a pain? Was it horrible? What was that time?
I thought it was a good time. But it was very difficult. I think if you talk to anybody that was really involved at the grassroots level on getting this membership, there were really difficult choices to make. As you know, being from traditional karate, the loyalty issue is very, very strong within all the separate organizations. The native Japanese instructors, there were very few that followed Judas theory. So Yamazaki Sensei was one. Let's see, Junki Yoshida. I can't remember.
So was Demura involved at that time? Was Demura involved at that time?
Well, Demura never prevented his athletes from participating. Well, let me put it this way: there were a number of Demura Sensei students that competed in NKF, as well as other tournaments other than AAU. Kotaka Sensei from Hawaii was another example. So Elisa Ao and George Kotaka, those guys, all those athletes from Hawaii that medaled came out of that Kotaka system in Hawaii. And they did AAU as well as NKF. But it was a really difficult choice to make because we didn't know, for those of us that were not part of that native Japanese structure of instructors, we didn't know which way anybody was going to go. Okay, when we decided to have that national championship in Seattle, Washington, and we had it the same year that we split off from AAU. They had their championships, our championships followed. And I was just happy to see that Yamazaki Sensei was on board as well. Because, that would have been difficult to say, well, Sensei, I'm following these guys, but you're not part of it. So, that kind of thing. As I said, there were not a lot of Japanese instructors signed on. So later on, they started to come on board for the National Federation. Demura Sensei has never committed to, as far as I know, NKF organization. I mean, David Crockett, whom I know that you competed with him, he was one of Demura's premier students. He never prevented David from participating in, and I think he has a history of AAU competition as well as NKF competition. So
yeah, he was all well. Sensei, going back to your championship match or the 1977 WUKO Championship, how was that? Were you competing on a regular basis prior to that tournament? Was that your first international competition? How was that experience?
That was my first and last international competition. So I was 31 at the time. Okay,
really?
So late bloomer. I actually started karate when I was, I started karate late. I started after
most of us did in those days.
Senior in high school. When I look at some of these athletes today that have been training since they're, age 4 and stuff, I look at them and if they're really good, I look at them and think, God, I hope they have the right vision to see how lucky they are to be doing what they're doing, and also to appreciate the kind of support system that's important to attain even the level that they're at right now. The parental support system, as well as dojo and the correct instructors, training with the right people that have the right heart and the right spirit. That total support system that's necessary to get to the highest level. I hope they see that, the younger kids, because it's impossible. You can't do it by yourself. At some point, everyone has to admit somebody helped you.
Absolutely.
Somebody helped you some way.
So you go to Japan. How was it? Were you nervous, scared to death? How was that? I know my first international experience. When I went to my first experience international was, I think, in 1984, and I went to Japan. I just remember they opened up the doors and there were 30 rings, and we were sitting in this room in Seiza with, I'd say, 200 black belts from all over the country. We're all sitting together and just I looked kind of cool, but inside I was just stressing to death. How was your experience?
Well, the first day, here's another thing. I was so lucky because I got to compete in the Budokan. And the Budokan, now it's a facility. They have rock concerts and all that kind of stuff. But that facility was built to house the Tokyo Olympics for judo. That's when they added judo. They built that Budokan in Tokyo. So it has a long martial arts history. So first thing, I get to compete at the Budokan. Okay, so I said, oh, okay, even if I lose, this is going to be great. So I the first day there, they opened up the facility, and then they wanted to go practice. Everybody's going to get on the mat. All the teams are on And they just had, I think they had 5 tatami set up. They had one in the center and they had 4 satellite ones. And it was elevated, right? They had a covering over, and it was a canvas covering. And then, the ring designations for perimeters, all that stuff, it was all printed into this canvas thing. But when you look down at the canvas, you see all this blood stain, all these blood stains. We didn't as aggressively try to put out people's teeth that came to our dojos, okay? But I was warned with the first time I went over to Japan, you go to different dojos, watch your teeth, they're going to try and take
Absolutely.
it out. So I'm looking at all the blood stains all over, and I'm thinking, okay, it's real time now.
Well, when you competed, did you feel that you performed at your top level, or was it less because of that first initial experience and stress?
I think I probably could have competed better because there were 2 issues that were kind of problems. Prior to going to the World Championships was in December. That same year, 1977, I went to Japan the first time just to train, and I went in August. But just prior to that trip, I got a really severe groin injury. Then in December, I got a cold. So when I went to the World Championships, I was nursing this cold plus that old injury, and everything went okay. So, but when I was competing, you know, as different athletes talk about, or when you have an accident, everything slows down. I can remember doing the kata and seeing people's faces out in the audience. It had just slowed down to just this kind of pace. It was really interesting. But when I was on that mat, when they called my name and stuff like that, the only thing I think about is just do the kata clean. Right? I don't care about the score or anything. Just do it clean, do the best you can, you know. And that's what I concentrated on.
Hey, thank you for joining the show. Part 2 of my 2-part discussion with Sensei Gary Tsutsui will be out in about a week or so. In that conversation, he'll discuss his move back from California into Colorado. He'll discuss a bad accident that he had. It was an extremely bad accident. Talk about starting his school and get his final views on the state of traditional karate and the state of sport competition. So with that, we'll see you soon and take care.